The ballroom smelled faintly of vanilla and champagne, a scent that seemed to hover just above the clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Balloons in silver and navy floated at each corner, their glossy surfaces reflecting the soft amber light. A banner stretched across the far wall read, "Happy Retirement, Margaret!" in bold letters, the kind of cheerful font usually reserved for birthdays. I never thought I'd see my name on one of those banners. Not because I doubted I'd make it this far. 35 years in this company had taught me a lot about survival, but because I couldn't quite imagine stepping away. Work had been more than work. It had been rhythm, purpose, even armor. And yet here I was, dressed in a navy dress I'd bought just for tonight, smiling through the surreal haze of it all. Colleagues came up one after another, some with heartfelt words, some with inside jokes I hadn't thought about in decades. "Remember that time the copier jammed during the board presentation and you fixed it with a paperclip?" one said. Another added, "You saved me my first year here. You told me not to apologize for being ambitious." Their stories warmed me. Even as they tugged at places inside me I hadn't expected to feel so tender. When my boss, Harold, finally tapped his glass with a fork, the chatter quieted. He was grinning ear to ear, that practiced grin of a man who'd made the same speech at half a dozen retirement parties before mine. He spread his arms dramatically and said, "Well, folks, it finally happened. After years of dedication, Margaret has decided to let someone younger take over the reins." Laughter rippled through the room, lighthearted and easy. I smiled along with everyone else, though inside, his words stung more than I cared to admit. Younger. That single word carried a weight. It wasn't meant cruelly. I knew Harold well enough to understand it was just his brand of humor. But still, it pressed against the quiet fear I'd been carrying, that stepping down meant stepping aside, fading into irrelevance. I lifted my glass, intending to make some quip in return, but my throat tightened. Instead, I lowered it, letting the sound of laughter and clapping wash over me. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay graceful. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration after all. As the chatter resumed, I drifted to the edge of the crowd, watching the clusters of conversations. My colleagues, my second family, were smiling, but already their attention was shifting to who would fill the gap I was leaving. That was natural. Life goes on. Still standing there, I felt both celebrated and invisible at the same time. A younger woman from accounting hugged me tightly. "I hope I can have a career like yours someday," she said earnestly. Her eyes shone with admiration. That should have comforted me, but instead it reminded me of how far I'd traveled and how uncertain the path ahead looked. Retirement. The word tasted strange in my mouth. It sounded like endings, like quiet afternoons and long stretches of silence. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I wasn't sure I'd ever be. But for now, I smiled. I thanked. I accepted every toast and hug. I let myself stand in the glow of gratitude, even if underneath it a restless ache stirred. I thought this was the end of my story here. I didn't yet know the night would prove me wrong. Just as Harold's joke settled into the hum of conversation, a sharper clinking rang out from the head table. It was Robert Callahan, our CEO, tall and commanding in his tailored gray suit. Even after all these years, his presence had the kind of gravity that pulled every eye toward him. He raised his glass, and the room quieted instantly. "Margaret," he began, his voice warm yet formal, the way he spoke at shareholder meetings. "Tonight, we gather to honor not just your years of service, but the impact you've had on this company, on all of us." My cheeks flushed, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. Robert wasn't known for casual praise. In fact, I could count on one hand the times he'd given me a compliment in public. He went on, "From the early days, you've set the standard. You led with conviction when it wasn't easy to lead, and you made decisions that shaped the foundation of where we stand today. We're not just saying goodbye to a colleague. We're recognizing someone who's built a legacy." Applause filled the ballroom. I smiled, though my pulse had quickened. Goodbye. That word landed differently coming from him, more final somehow. Robert raised his glass higher, and his next words shifted the air in the room. And with that in mind, he said slowly, "We've decided we're not ready to let you go." The applause tapered off, replaced by murmurs. My own smile froze. Not ready to let me go? Robert looked straight at me. Starting this fall, Margaret will serve as consultant to the entire board. The room went silent for half a beat, and then an eruption of clapping and cheers spread like a wave. People stood, glasses lifted, voices overlapping. "Congratulations, amazing, well-deserved." I stood frozen, glass trembling slightly in my hand. Consultant? To the board? My ears rang as if I'd been dunked underwater. This was supposed to be a farewell, a clean line between what was and what would be. Instead, the ground had shifted beneath me. Robert smiled. "Your wisdom is too valuable to lose. You'll have a seat at the table, your voice guiding the very future you've helped create." The words were generous, almost poetic, but all I could think was, I thought I was done. As I looked around, I caught flashes of different reactions. Some colleagues clapped with genuine delight. Others exchanged glances I knew too well, the kind laced with envy or resentment. Harold's grin had dimmed slightly, though he kept clapping. He'd made his joke about me making way for the younger generation, but now it seemed the company wasn't ready for that shift. Inside, my emotions tangled. Pride, yes, but also a sharp pang of fear. What would this new role mean for me? Was I stepping into honor or into obligation? Could I handle the scrutiny of being tied to the boardroom after all these years, when I'd been preparing myself, however reluctantly, for quiet mornings and slower days? I lifted my glass, managing a smile. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is unexpected." The laughter that followed eased the tension, but inside me, nothing had eased. The applause rolled on, cameras flashed, and people leaned toward me with congratulations. Outwardly, I nodded, hugged, accepted. Inwardly, I felt the weight of a new chapter pressing against the one I thought I'd just closed. As the night carried on, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't leaving this company after all. I was stepping into uncharted territory, a role that promised both recognition and challenge. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or dread. The announcement echoed in my head long after the applause faded. Consultant to the board. It sounded grand, almost regal. But behind that title was the weight of everything it had taken to get here. As people mingled and music swelled, I drifted inward, back through the corridors of memory, the climb that had brought me to this point. When I started at the company in the late 80s, I was 24, fresh out of grad school with a degree in business administration and a fire in my chest. I walked into a sea of gray suits and polished shoes, most of them attached to men twice my age. Women were rare in the department, and those who were there seemed to hover near the edges, doing the work but rarely getting the credit. I remember one of my first meetings vividly. I had spent all weekend preparing a financial analysis that revealed a potential risk in one of our investment strategies. When I presented it, my voice steady but my palms damp, one of the senior managers leaned back in his chair and said, "Cute presentation, sweetheart, but let's hear what the real analysts have to say." Laughter rippled around the table. It stung, badly. But something in me hardened that day. I decided if they were going to underestimate me, I'd make sure they'd regret it. I stayed late, worked weekends, and became the person who noticed details others overlooked. I wasn't just trying to prove myself, I was fighting to be seen. Years rolled on. I learned the rhythms of corporate life, the politics, the alliances, the silent wars fought in memos and budget meetings. I learned how to speak in a room full of skeptics without flinching. I learned how to say no without apology. And slowly, I carved out respect. Not given, earned. There were sacrifices, too. I missed my daughter's school plays more times than I like to admit. Vacations were often interrupted by phone calls and urgent crises. My marriage strained under the weight of my hours, and eventually, it didn't survive. Those losses left scars, ones I carried quietly while pushing forward. But there were triumphs. The first time, my name was on a major project that turned into a multi-million-dollar success. The first time a young woman in the office pulled me aside and said, "I didn't think I could make it here until I saw you do it." The first time I sat at the head of the table, not the corner. Looking back, I realized my career had been a mosaic of both battles and victories. Each rejection, each condescending chuckle, each late night, it all added up to a life of persistence. And maybe that was why Robert's announcement shook me so deeply. Because in his words, in that new role, was a kind of recognition I'd never fully received before. Not just acknowledgement of my work, but validation of my endurance. Yet even with that recognition, I felt the old tension rising. Had I done enough? Given enough? Was I ready to step into yet another proving ground, this time with the entire board as my audience? The flashbacks faded as someone touched my arm, a colleague asking for a photo. I smiled, posed, and returned to the present. But inside, I carried the reminder of how far I'd come and the uneasy question of how much further I was willing to go. The morning after the party, I woke up with a pounding headache, not from the champagne, but from the swirl of thoughts that refused to quiet through the night. Sunlight spilled across my bedroom, touching the stack of retirement cards on the dresser. They'd been filled with words like, "Enjoy your freedom and time to relax," but those sentiments already felt outdated. Freedom, relaxation, were those still mine to claim? I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the steam rising like a question mark. Retirement was supposed to be a clean chapter break. I had envisioned mornings like this stretching into infinity, slow coffee, quiet walks, maybe even signing up for that art class I'd put off for years. I was supposed to breathe easier now, not carry a new responsibility on my shoulders. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter, Claire. "Mom, the announcement was incredible. So proud of you." I smiled, my heart softening. Then came another text, this time from my friend Diane, who retired 3 years earlier. "Don't let them pull you back in, Maggie. You've given enough. Now it's your time." 2 voices, 2 truths, pride and caution, celebration and warning. Over the next few days, the same theme repeated. My colleagues were thrilled for me, treating the promotion like a victory lap. My family's reactions were split. Claire cheered. My son Michael worried I'd exhaust myself, and my sister bluntly asked, "Are they honoring you or just using you?" Even within me, the debate raged. Honor or burden? One evening, I sat in my living room flipping through an old photo album. There I was, 20 years younger, presenting at a conference in New York, my eyes bright with determination. Another photo, my kids blowing out birthday candles without me in the frame. I'd been stuck at the office. The images told a story I couldn't ignore. Work had always come first. Did I really want to give it first place again? But there was another side. Age, in corporate America, often meant invisibility. I had watched brilliant women vanish from relevance after 50, their ideas dismissed, their names forgotten. And here I was being asked not just to stay, but to sit at the highest table. It was a rare gift, a rare chance. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking of Robert's words. "Your wisdom is too valuable to lose." For years, I'd fought to be heard. Now they wanted my voice. Was I really going to silence it myself? By Friday, I knew I had to choose. I poured another cup of coffee and whispered to myself, "You're not done yet." The words startled me. They felt less like a decision and more like a truth rising from deep inside. So I called Robert's office. His assistant answered, cheerful as ever. "Margaret, the board is thrilled. Can we confirm your start date?" I hesitated, then heard myself say, "Yes, let's do it." When I hung up, I sat very still. Relief mingled with dread, pride with apprehension. My retirement had been rewritten, the future pulled into unfamiliar shape. I didn't know where it would lead, but one thing was certain. I wasn't finished after all. Walking into the boardroom for the first time as a consultant felt strangely like the first day of school. The mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, leather chairs lined up like thrones, each one claimed by executives whose names carried weight in our industry. I'd sat in this room countless times before, but always as part of a leadership team, not as the one introduced as advisor to the board. Robert greeted me at the door, his handshake firm. "Margaret, welcome aboard," he said with a smile that managed to be both reassuring and expectant. The other directors rose slightly in acknowledgement as I entered. Some faces glowed with genuine warmth. Others offered tight-lipped smiles that felt more obligatory than welcoming. I could almost hear their thoughts. She was supposed to be retired. Why is she still here? I took my seat near the end of the table, my notebook neatly closed in front of me. I'd decided on that drive over. No rushing to prove myself, no over-explaining, just listening, observing, absorbing the rhythms of the room before I spoke. The meeting began. Numbers flashed on the screen, projections soared and dipped, strategies volleyed across the table. The younger executives spoke quickly, their words sharp, brimming with confidence. It was the same energy I once carried years ago, but I could also hear what went unsaid, the cracks in their assumptions, the blind spots they hadn't noticed. At one point, a proposal was floated to cut funding for a community initiative the company had supported for decades. The CFO argued it wasn't cost-efficient. Heads nodded. My heart tightened. That program had built trust with neighborhoods, families, entire cities. Killing it would save money, yes, but it would cost something far greater in the long run. I could feel the familiar heat rise in my chest. This was the moment, my choice to either stay silent or step into the role I'd been given. I cleared my throat lightly. "With respect," I said, my voice steady but calm. "I think we need to consider what we'd be giving up if we cut this program. It's more than a budget line. It's a part of our reputation, our promise to the communities that buy our products and trust our brand. You can't measure that on a quarterly spreadsheet, but believe me, you'll feel it when it's gone." The room stilled. Eyes turned toward me. Some skeptical, some curious. One younger executive shifted in his chair. "That's a fair point, but the board has to focus on returns." I met his gaze. Returns aren't just financial. They're also about loyalty, about legacy. You can't cash those in today, but they'll keep you standing tomorrow. Silence stretched. Then Robert nodded slowly. "She's right," he said, his tone decisive. "We'll revisit this before making any cuts." The conversation moved on, but I felt the ripple. Not everyone agreed with me, but they'd listened. I'd planted a flag. As the meeting ended, a director I barely knew leaned over and whispered, "Glad you said that. We needed to hear it." Walking out of the boardroom, I realized my nerves had shifted into something else, resolve. I wasn't here to fade quietly into the background. I was here to bring the weight of perspective, the voice of someone who'd seen storms come and go, and maybe, just maybe, to remind this room of powerhouses that wisdom doesn't retire. The honeymoon didn't last long. By the second month, the weight of my new role pressed in hard. The board wasn't a classroom eager for guidance. It was a battlefield where egos collided and agendas lurked under every polished word. One afternoon, we gathered to discuss a potential merger. The younger executives were practically buzzing, their voices rising with enthusiasm. Charts and slides painted the deal as a golden opportunity, fast growth, bigger market share, headlines that would thrill investors. But as I scanned the reports, a knot formed in my stomach. The numbers looked glossy, but beneath them, I saw cracks, untested markets, cultural misalignment, risks no one wanted to say out loud. I'd lived through the fallout of a dream deal once before, back in the 90s, when a rushed acquisition bled us for years. When Robert turned to me, his voice steady but curious, "Margaret, what's your take?" I knew the room expected me to rubber stamp the excitement. I set the papers down and met their eyes. "I think we're running toward a fire with a can of gasoline. On paper, this looks promising. But in practice, we're setting ourselves up for disaster. The risks aren't hypothetical. They're history repeating itself." A murmur swept across the table. One director frowned. "With respect, Margaret, this isn't the 90s. The market's changed." I held his gaze. Markets change, but people don't. Culture clashes, overextension, inflated promises, they break companies no matter the decade. The tension thickened. Some directors leaned forward, clearly irritated. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to choose sides. I could feel the weight of my words tilting the room. One particularly brash executive smirked. "Maybe it's time we stop looking backward and start trusting the vision of those leading us into the future." I inhaled, choosing my next words carefully. Vision without memory is blindness. If you dismiss the past, you'll trip over it. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart thudded in my chest, but my expression stayed calm, practiced. Years of being underestimated had trained me well. Robert finally broke the pause. "We'll slow this down," he said, voice clipped but decisive. "I want a deeper analysis before we move forward." The meeting adjourned, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. As people filed out, I caught the cold glance of the young executive who'd mocked me. I knew what he was thinking. She's blocking progress. Walking back to my office, doubt pricked at me. Had I been too harsh? Too stubborn? Was I already becoming the relic some feared I'd be? But then, later that week, a junior analyst slipped me a note after a meeting. "Thank you for speaking up. A lot of us saw the risks, but didn't feel we had the right to say it." That simple note reminded me why I was there. My job wasn't to be popular. It was to be honest. Weeks later, after the board quietly shelved the merger, Robert stopped me in the hallway. "You saved us," he said simply. "Most wouldn't have had the courage to say what you did." His words didn't erase the conflict, but they steadied me. Triumph, I realized, doesn't come from unanimous applause. It comes from standing your ground when the room would rather you sit down. And for the first time since my retirement, I felt not just useful but necessary. After the merger battle, something in me shifted. The board began to listen more carefully, even if begrudgingly at times. My role wasn't just ceremonial anymore. It had teeth. But outside the walls of that glass tower, I began to notice the deeper ripples of what this late chapter in my career truly meant. One Saturday morning, I was invited to speak at a local university's Women in Business conference. I almost declined. Old habits of burying myself in work die hard. But Claire nudged me. "Mom, you have no idea how much women my age need to hear from someone like you." Standing on that stage, looking out at rows of young women with notebooks open and eyes wide, I felt something stir in me. I told them about the paperclip and the copier, about the condescending sweetheart comment, about missing birthday candles, and about the day I finally took my seat at the head of the table. I spoke honestly. About victories, yes, but also the cost of them. When I finished, the applause felt different than any boardroom victory. It wasn't about money or power. It was about connection. A young woman came up afterward, her voice trembling as she said, "I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this field, but hearing you makes me believe I can keep going." That moment stayed with me longer than any quarterly win. Back at the office, I started making more time for mentorship. I began pulling junior women aside, the way I once wished someone had done for me. "Your ideas matter," I told them. "Don't shrink." Sometimes I saw myself reflected in their nervous smiles, and I silently vowed to help them skip at least a few of the battles that had bruised me. At home, legacy took on another meaning. Claire had just gotten a promotion of her own, and Michael, though still wary of my hours, started sending me articles about women leaders breaking barriers. "Thought you'd like this, Mom," he'd text. Our conversations, once tense about my absence, began to soften into something new: respect, even pride. And then there were the quieter reckonings. One night, I dug out that old photo album again. I lingered on the empty space at my kid's birthday table, the missed vacations. For years, I carried shame about those absences, as though they defined me. But now, as I looked at the fuller story, I realized my children hadn't just grown up without me. They had grown up watching me, watching a woman push against limits, fall and rise and keep fighting for her place. That, too, was part of my legacy. Retirement no longer meant stepping off the stage. It meant rewriting what the stage even looked like. I wasn't bound to a 9-to-5 anymore, but I wasn't fading into the background either. I was shaping from a different vantage point. Legacy, I realized, isn't a plaque on a wall or a line in a company history book. It's the echoes of our choices in the lives of others. It's the courage to keep showing up, even when the world suggests you've aged out of relevance. And for the first time, I began to see my future not as borrowed time, but as a gift of continuation, one I intended to use well. 6 months after my so-called retirement party, I found myself back in that same ballroom, only this time, the banner above the stage wasn't mine. It read, "Celebrating Our Future Leaders." The company was honoring a group of rising executives, most of them decades younger than me. The room buzzed with the same mix of laughter, clinking, glasses, and small talk that had marked my own farewell. But this time, I wasn't the guest of honor. I was simply another face at the table, seated beside directors and managers, watching the next generation step forward. As I listened to the speeches, I felt something unexpected: peace. Months earlier, I might have bristled at not being in the spotlight. Now I realize this: passing the torch, but still having a seat near the fire, was exactly where I belonged. Halfway through the evening, Robert stood again, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Tonight we celebrate those who will shape the next chapter of our company. But before we move forward, I want to acknowledge the steady presence who has guided us through this transition." His eyes found mine. "Margaret, would you care to say a few words?" The room turned, expectant. My pulse quickened, but this time I didn't freeze. I rose, lifting my glass, and for a moment let the silence gather. "When I stood here months ago," I began, "I thought I was closing a chapter. I thought I was finished. But life has a way of reminding us that endings can also be beginnings." A ripple of smiles moved through the crowd. I looked at the younger faces in the room, their sharp suits, their eager eyes, the same mix of confidence and doubt I once carried. "I want to tell you something," I continued. "Your worth here won't be measured only by the deals you close or the numbers you hit. It will be measured by the people you lift, the integrity you keep, and the courage you show when it would be easier to stay quiet." The room grew still. Even the clinking glasses ceased. When I started, I was told to step aside, to let the real analysts talk. I was underestimated, dismissed, even laughed at, but I stayed. I fought. And eventually, I sat at the table. Not because I was the loudest voice, but because I refused to let anyone silence mine. My throat tightened, but I steadied myself, raising the glass higher. "So here's my toast, not to me, but to all of you. May you never let anyone tell you that your time has passed, that your ideas don't matter, or that you're not enough. You are enough, and you're just getting started." Applause erupted, loud and genuine, filling the ballroom. Some people stood, others wiped their eyes. For once, I didn't shrink from the attention. I let it wash over me, not as a spotlight, but as a shared flame. I sat back down, heart steady, the glass warm in my hand. This wasn't retirement. This wasn't even a second career. This was something else entirely. The freedom to define myself on my own terms. And as the applause faded into laughter and chatter again, I realized that legacy isn't about being remembered when you're gone. It's about being present enough to shape the story while you're still here,